All right, I can start admitting. Okay, it looks like people are arriving. That's great. Hi, everyone. Welcome as people are coming and joining us on this webinar. We're thrilled to see everyone. Please feel free to say hello in the chat and to share your name and your project and gender pronoun if you wish to, and also set your screen name in Zoom. Looking forward to talking with everyone today. Okay, oh, hi, Julie. Welcome. Well, maybe just give people another few seconds to join and then we'll get started. Ah, hello. Hi, Mahmoudar. Nice to see you. Yes. Oh, hi, Vicky.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. Nice to see you here. Okay, I think we'll get started. And here's Karis, welcome. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in Canada, and bonjour. And on behalf of the KDE Hub and scientific co-directors, I'd like to warmly welcome you to our KDE Hub hosted webinar today. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Alice Schmidt-Hambidge, and I'm one of the KDE Hub scientific co-directors. My colleague, Dr. Colleen McMillan, will be closing our webinar today, and I can see she just waved, so thanks for that, Colleen. Colleen and I are thrilled to be with you on this important journey to enhance mental health equity and promotion in Canada. As we just passed our 60-day mark in our new roles, we wish to acknowledge the founding Hub scientific director, Barb Riley, and the tremendous foundational work that she and the team have done together. And we're thrilled to pick up where the Hub got to and carry this beautiful project further. Just wanted to acknowledge who's gathering for this webinar today. So this webinar is open to the MHPIF projects. The FAC, our funders, and our Hub support team are here today. And as you noted when you came into the webinar, this session is being recorded and will be accessible at a later date. There's so much great information coming, so be sure to look at it again. I'd just like to provide a brief overview of the webinar today. We'll be running for 1.5 hours, so until 2:30 Ontario time, that is. And for our session overview, this session aims to engage the IF project as important partners engaging and advancing health equity. So this session is a follow-up session to last year's interactive webinar held in June 2021. And we'll build on the previous session by introducing project level tools specifically designed for the MHPIF project. The FAC team is calling this a pilot light for several reasons. So you're seeing brand new tools here, and FAC is looking for willing projects to put them to the test. And the goal here is to provide foundational knowledge for building health equity indicators and measures into your project evaluation plan. So we're fortunate to have the webinar hosted or led today by Andrea Simpson, who is the Senior Program and Policy Analyst for Public Health Agency of Canada. And we'll be focusing on applying the Health Equity Indicators tool. And there was some reading material shared with you in advance of the presentation. And Colleen will be closing the webinar, as I mentioned, and I'd like to turn things over to Andrea at this point. So thanks so much, Andrea, for joining us, and we're excited that you're here with us today.
Thank you very much, Alice. Bienvenue, welcome, Kwei. Je suis ravie de l'occasion qui m'est donnée de communiquer avec vous aujourd'hui pour la partie 2 de l'exploration de l'équité en santé en mettant l'accent sur les perspectives du projet. It's my pleasure to be able to connect with you today for part 2 of exploring health equity with a focus on project perspectives. Health equity is a concept that takes its meaning from place, space, and time. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you from Apakwet, also known as Prince Edward Island, the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I invite all of you to take a moment to reflect on the land from which you join and the many nations and people for whom that land is traditional territory or home. Je tiens à souligner que nous visons à créer un environnement accueillant pour tous nos projets aujourd'hui. Grande partie de la présentation est disponible dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Certains diapos sont bilingues et d'autres ont été traduits et se trouvent dans l'annexe de cette présentation. Quelques-uns nous ont échappé. S'il y a quoi qui n'est pas clair, Eric, qui est avec le Carrefour, et moi sommes à votre service. Please advance slide. Donc, le but. The purpose today. During this webinar, we hope that MHPIF projects will recognize themselves as important actors in advancing health equity, become more familiar with the resources and tools that exist to support project level work, and be invited to explore ways to build equity measures into core project work. Alors, nous espérons que les projets se reconnaîtront comme des acteurs importants dans la promotion de l'équité en santé, seront familiarisés davantage avec les ressources et les outils qui existent pour soutenir le travail au niveau du projet et seront invités à explorer les moyens d'intégrer des mesures d'équité dans le travail de base. Next slide, please. Okay, an aperçu, a bit of an outline here, just to give you a sense of where we're headed for the next hour and a half. Quick recap. We'll kick off with that of core concepts and guidance and tools. So picking up on from where we left off last June. Then connecting the dots, beginning to look at where equity already shows up in the program and in project reporting, linking that to the project annual reporting tool and the phase 2 application, among other things. Then we'll dive into the pilot light, which is the most exciting part of this webinar today, where you take over and hopefully give us an opportunity to have a good discussion on the new tools. And then we will move into a very quick sort of at-a-glance view of some measures and methods to regarding health equity analysis. And then we will also look at some sample indicators and walk through a few examples out there of tools available. And closing with some next steps. Please advance the slide. Alors, pourquoi? Why are we here? Just to remind ourselves, health equity is a term that is widely used in population mental health promotion. However, its application remains somewhat unclear. And the subtext to that is, how do we translate health equity objectives into practice? Next slide, please. Alors, que signifie le terme équité en santé pour le Fonds d'innovation pour la promotion de la santé? What does the term health equity mean to the MHPIF? Well, these three images illustrate points along the continuum, from providing equal conditions to equality of opportunity, which is the middle image, to achieving equitable outcomes through the removal of systemic barriers, which is the final third image. Next slide, please. So just to expand on that, the MHPIF supports promising and innovative population health interventions that actively seek to remove structural barriers to health equity through strong partnerships, reflexive practice, learning, knowledge exchange, and ultimately systems change. Please advance slide. One of the core concepts that we base our work on, our program, is intersectionality. And this really refers to avoidable or remediable differences in health among populations or groups defined socially, economically, or geographically. So when we talk about addressing inequity in the program, we think it means more than targeting disadvantage within a population group and or a geographic region. It means reaching those living at the intersections of inequality by removing barriers to optimal health. So here's where the transition happens from concept to practice. We're proposing that intersectional thinking and analysis is what enables us to translate health equity objectives into health equity action. So this is where we paused last year in terms of the core concepts, and just as a refresher. So far, so good. I haven't hopefully lost anyone. Feel free to put your hand up if you have any questions. So we'll continue then to the next, please. Or guidance and tools, both then and now. So last June, we introduced MHPIF projects to a number of tools to make health equity more explicit at the design and early implementation stages of project interventions. This particular session today will delve deeper into full implementation and early measurement. Donc, cette session présentera au projet un certain nombre d'outils pour rendre l'équité en santé plus explicite, surtout aux étapes de mise en œuvre et de mesure des interventions. Please advance slide. So we introduced you last year to some fact-published guidance and tools, including the overarching diagram that you just saw. And hopefully most of you recognize the diagram. And that was really a first attempt to distill the essential ingredients involved in advancing health equity in a concise and accessible format. Another important aim of the original tools was to make explicit the steps involved in taking action on health equity. A moment ago, I suggested that addressing inequities means reaching those living at the intersections of inequality by removing barriers to health. So what are some of those intersections? These are the mediating factors that are on the left and the right of the diagram en français et en anglais. And these represent different entry points to inequities in child and youth mental health, which flow from the social determinants of health. So things like affordable housing, food security, treaty and charter rights, social inclusion and cultural identity and expression, these all shape mental health trajectories over the life course. And these form the entry points that allow us to hopefully reroute those trajectories to enhance the mental health outcomes of children, youth, and their caregivers. Donc, l'élaboration de stratégies pour lutter contre les inéquités en santé mentale nécessite de comprendre et de décider comment agir sur les déterminants sociaux sous-jacents de la santé, qui sont les facteurs médiateurs. Please advance to the next slide. So this brings us to the present day and the sort of soft launch or pilot light, if you will, of the new project level tools. Most of the content in this diagram is not particularly new. This is the world your projects inhabit. So I don't expect you to see something that jumps out necessarily as new to you. However, we're hoping that it could be useful as a conversation starter with prospective partners, or even building a shared understanding with existing partners. It may perhaps help to create a greater understanding among frontline project staff and say your evaluation team. The point of this approach is really to look at meaningful differences and to understand them in context. So there's always a way to build solidarity across social locations rather than further alienate or divide. So I wanted to draw your attention, first of all, to what might be a little bit new in the diagram. If you could advance to the next slide, please. So step one, which is on the far left, represents, I would say, a more nuanced approach to defining equity issues or an issue. As projects, you already have a pretty strong understanding of how the populations you work with experience vulnerabilities across cultural, social, and economic forms of disadvantage. So at the same time, it is still possible to overlook important differences within population groups. So asking these questions that you find under step one is a way to be able to appreciate the multidimensional nature of equity work, as well as become more conscious of hidden bias in our assumptions. It's also meant to offer a starting point for intersectional analysis as we grow our collective capacity to take equity analysis deeper and further. And we'll get into that a little more later. Please advance to the next slide. So step three is not necessarily new, but we think it's improved. And the aim here was to better align best practice and address gaps that were in the previous iteration. So for example, being intentional about working with Indigenous leadership where Indigenous lives are concerned. Another example is the emphasis on building respectful relationships with persons with lived experience, sometimes also referred to as lived experience experts, a term I find refreshing. A quick word on the content under the subheading for reach and impact. So the four approaches that you see there, universal, targeted within universal, proportionate, universal, and targeted, they're best explained in a primer that was put out by the National Collaborating Center on the Determinants of Health, which we've provided a link to on this slide. It's a very short and accessible read, and I strongly encourage you to access it if you have not already. This particular piece around equity targeting is very rich terrain to explore with you, I think, at this juncture, and here's why. There's a growing conversation in public health promotion around interventions that blend approaches. And these interventions fall along that continuum as you see there. And they're designed to address both the health gap and the health gradient. When we asked about which equity-informed approach you had taken to engage audiences, most phase 1 projects were identified targeted or targeted within universalism for the project annual reporting tool that was completed in April 2021. 14, to be precise, versus 6. And that changed at the end of phase 1. The April 2022 annual report showed a much more even distribution across the continuum. And what's more, 6 projects changed their responses between phase 1 and phase 2. When asked why you had chosen a particular approach, projects really took the time to contextualize their responses, which is fantastic. And as your projects grow and evolve in phase 2, we invite you to consider whether the approach you had adopted in phase 1 continues to hold, or whether some hybrid might help further advance your objectives. And we look forward to analyzing the data further because we are really curious about those 6 projects who decided to answer differently, and whether that was informed by your deepening knowledge of this continuum, or whether it was based on a conscious decision to change your approach. Next slide, please. So this was the sort of introductory piece to the other new tool, which is the Health Equity Indicators tool. And so here, je vous invite à considérer les 2 fonctions de l'outil, telles que décrit sous la deuxième colonne. So I invite you to think about the 2 general kind of purposes of this tool that are described under the second column. D'abord, l'outil peut servir à déterminer les composantes d'une initiative qui tienne compte de l'équité en santé, ainsi que ses lacunes. So the tool can serve 2 functions. It can help you define or determine which elements of an initiative already are taking equity into consideration, as well as identify possible gaps. L'outil sert à renforcer la capacité d'intégrer, de surveiller et d'évaluer les répercussions sur l'équité en santé au niveau du projet, qui est l'aspect novateur, certainement pour le programme. So this tool really serves to reinforce or strengthen capacity to integrate, monitor, and evaluate the impacts of equity on mental health at the project level, which is the novelty in this new tool from a program perspective. So the tool is organized under 3 domains, which aim to follow a similar logic to those that you would see in former tools, beginning with an analysis of inequalities that are most pertinent or relevant to your project, followed by the key considerations tied to reach, and then finally measurement, measuring impact on health equity. So, au cœur de cette entreprise, c'est vraiment l'expertise et l'expérience que chacun parmi vous amène à la table. So, really at the heart of this whole kind of endeavor is your experience and expertise, what you bring forward as projects, which is why we've chosen this term pilot light. Please go to the next slide. So really, as a program, this is the next important step. It's really to facilitate the use of grounded measures, including their interpretation and analysis, to strengthen and deepen the equity dimensions of project work. So the aim of the indicators tool is to build capacity, as I said earlier, to integrate these and monitor and assess health equity impacts for the protective factors that you have identified as your project scope by drilling down to the level of measures. So this worksheet is organized under the 3 domains that follow a similar logic found in the accompanying tools. It's still very much considered to be a working draft. And of course, you will have probably noticed that the column on the far right is blank. And that's because we didn't want to be prescriptive at this stage about which measures and methods would be most useful to you. So nor did we want to assume that the criteria themselves align with how projects identify equity work. So at the center of this really is your expertise, as I said earlier, and really without your involvement, we can't test nor really improve these tools. So we're going to take a little pause here and ask you a question, a poll, because I've been talking for quite a bit now. So we'll turn it over to Aneta.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and hi, everybody. We're going to have a few polls through the webinar. All 3 polls, and I'm going to launch the first one so you'll see the first question, but they'll be single choice and they're anonymous. So you should see something coming up shortly. And please let us know in chat if you don't see the question. I think some of you are already seeing it. I'll read it out loud. How likely are you to apply the new tools to your project in the next 3 months? Alors, quelle est la probabilité que vous appliquiez les nouveaux outils à votre projet dans les 3 prochains mois? So, not likely, peu probable, somewhat likely, moyennement, probable, very likely, très probable. And I'll just give you a few moments to submit your answers. And I think most people have voted. I see a few more coming in. All right, so lock in your choices. And I'll just share back the results here. And we see that there's about 50-50, I'd say, split between somewhat likely and very likely.
That's super encouraging because we are actively looking for volunteers to test drive these tools. So if you're one of the people who said very likely, we're going to call on you hopefully in the next little bit to help us out with this work. That's great to hear or see. Okay, well, let's move on then to connecting the dots, shall we? So in this part, we want to, yes, kind of make a little more of a clear link among the various pieces and that the program and projects are using already. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Yes, so this should be somewhat familiar, this table. These are the protective factors that the MHPIF has pulled together for guidance. And these are well documented in the published literature. They are a foundation for the program and one that we continue, however, to refine as projects generate more of their own findings. So this is in part what I meant when I suggested that projects see themselves as important actors in advancing health equity. One of the crucial ways is through building the evidence base. Advance to the next slide, please. So here is how you are already contributing to that evidence base. This crosswalk aims to highlight the continuum along which MHPIF aims to guide and enable projects to design, for, implement, and assess the equity dimensions of their work. So that first column on the left identifies the broad equity dimension that projects are working toward. In this case, focused on systemic inequalities in health and acting on the social determinants of health. So through the annual reporting tool, which is in the middle column, the program is gradually introducing questions to begin building an evidence base that can directly speak to equity inputs, impacts, and outcomes over time. So you'll see the two-part question in the middle column that was first introduced in the April 2021, I should say, phase 1 end of year project annual reporting tool. So we have to please explain how equity was factored into the development and early implementation of the intervention by providing details about the population groups who are the focus of the intervention and the social, material, economic, or geographic factors associated with differences in health for the population groups who are the focus of the intervention. We were really very encouraged by the quality of responses provided in that first round. This new project level tool aims to strengthen the evidence that projects can provide during annual reporting periods by drilling further into that substrata of equity analysis and measurement. And that takes us to the third column, which creates a link to both the project level infographic and the indicators tool. So just bear with me here. So in the infographic, the question that was posed to you in the part ties in with step 1, how population group differences and conditions of disadvantage were taken into account. With respect to the health equity tool, indicator tool, it ties into the social determinants of health focus, which is spelled out in 3 sub bullets. So key factors contributing to the health inequalities are identified based on existing evidence and ways of knowing. Baseline data are collected to address gaps related to contributing factors. And the intervention level or scope is consistent with the key protective factors it aims to influence. So these are sort of this is the kind of continuous loop that we hope to build on and strengthen with you as we progress and as we test these tools further. Are there any questions so far? Are we hopefully not losing anybody yet, or not too much? So far so good. Okay. So keep moving on then to the following slide. So in your phase 2 application, there was a question we asked you under section 6, which was about the context. First, I'll just share with you how this connects up with the quote. So we also, of course, asked you to consider reading some optional, an optional paper written by the Foundation for, the Foundation, I'm forgetting their actual full name, FCG, I believe is it. This is a quote taken from the paper called The Water of Systems Change. And it says, systems change is about shifting the conditions that are holding the problem in place. So you may recall that we asked you to describe the system or systems that you are working in during that phase 2 application as a stepping stone for developing a theory of change. And we also encouraged funded phase 2 projects to begin thinking about systems change and the methods to monitor that systems change under section 7 of the application, which we'll get to in a moment. Next slide, please. So this inverted pyramid shows how the authors of The Water of Systems Change view the conditions that support that change. And one of the things I would draw your attention to is the text to the right of the pyramid. So what the authors describe as structural, relational, and transformative change. And each of these exists along, again, a continuum from explicit to semi-explicit to implicit. So to paraphrase, the authors further expand on these conditions in the paper. And they say, the less explicit conditions are the most challenging to clarify. However, these can have huge impacts on shifting the system. So those would be like the mental models and the semi-explicit relationships and power dynamics. So that's why it's so important to pay attention to those relationships and power dynamics, and especially the underlying mental models, such as racism and gender biases embedded in the systems in which they work. Next slide, please. Here we just have the conditions, the 4 conditions that are probably, I would say, the most impactful to focus on. And these are defined in the document. So they are mental models, which are habits of thought, deeply held beliefs and assumptions, and taken for granted ways of operating that influence how we think, what we do, and how we talk. The resource flows, how money, people, knowledge, information, and other assets such as infrastructure are allocated and distributed. Relationships and connections, the quality of connections and communication occurring among actors in the system, especially among those with differing histories and viewpoints. And finally, power dynamics, the distribution of decision-making power, authority, and both formal and informal influence among individuals and organizations. So these serve, I'd say, as pivot points where attitudes, beliefs, resources, relationships, and power sharing need to shift in order for systems change to occur. So we'll also now take a moment to ask you a question.
Okay, so this is our second poll of the day, and we're asking how relatable are these 6 conditions of systems change to your project work? Alors, dans quelle mesure ces 6 conditions de changement de système sont-elles liées à votre travail de projet? So I'll give you some time. And again, the conditions in the previous slide were policies, practices, resource flows, relationships and connections, power dynamics, and mental models. Okay, and if you haven't already put in your answer, please do so now. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so you should be able to see the results there that about 83% of folks said that these are very relatable, alors très lié, and about 17% somewhat relatable, un peu lié.
Very happy to see those results and glad that this paper has some utility. We certainly felt it did, but it's really nice to get that confirmation in real time. Thanks to everyone and Annetta for that. Please, then we'll move forward to the next slide. So I just wanted to further explore this theme of connecting the dots by looking at ways to advance equity through an engagement lens now. And so that's what we find in that first column on the left, the reach and engagement strategies. So demonstrating the intervention includes one or more equity-informed engagement strategies. So that by the end of phase 1, the end of phase 1 part, the project annual reporting tool included a new question this year. And that's the question you see in the middle column. So which of the following engagement strategies applies to your intervention, and provide details for each? So we would hope that this would serve to expand the evidence base and our overall understanding of how projects experience and enact equity work. So we asked you to expand on any or all that were applicable to your project. And these 4 are enumerated there under, so A, people who experience disadvantage are involved in the design and implementation. B, gender and culturally sensitive language, content, and forms of communication are used. C, the intervention is adapted to the local political and economic context. And D, non-health sectors, different levels of government, private, non-governmental, academic sectors are involved as appropriate. So that was what we put in the end of phase part. Again, we were really encouraged by the rich responses provided. We really think we're on the right track with these questions, but we also would like to hear from you about that. So at the same time, if we consider the previous diagram that we looked at, the inverted pyramid, this question also seems to connect up with systems change. Because when you consider A, B, C, and D, A really speaks to power dynamics and relationships. B is about relationships. C is about power dynamics and relationships. And D is about relationships and mental models. So we're, again, this is kind of where equity and of course system change start to, again, connect up and overlap. And it's no coincidence, I think. But so just to further, or to complete this exercise, the right hand, the furthest column to the right, elaborates on which elements of the new tools apply to this question. So step 3, how do I engage to be inclusive and influence factors affecting health? And in the health equity indicators tool, it would apply to equity targeting. And the two elements that we identify are that the intervention shows clear intent to benefit people who experience disadvantage by targeting in ways appropriate to reach them, and that the research or KDE agenda includes knowledge development to identify opportunities to promote health equity. So I know I'm throwing a lot of information and a lot of content at you, and I'm hoping that this is beginning to gel a little bit for people, but again, it's an opportunity for you to revisit the tools after this and have a chance to kind of let it sink in and reflect on what we've said today. So please advance to the next slide. So yes, I just want to connect up with the phase 2 application again, because we are wanting to be very deliberate, intentional, and consistent in how we engage you around equity. So as part of that phase 2 application, we did ask projects to answer the following questions. So what is the desired change you seek? And what key assumptions guide your project thinking about that change, how that change might come about, including concepts connected to a theory of change. So, and then we asked you to specify which or what changes are expected at multiple project levels. And we provided you with a table. And in that table, there were these 6 different levels. And they probably should seem a little familiar to you because they happen to align with the conditions of systems change, which was not an accident. So again, this is how we as a program view the opportunity that we're around health equity offers to also leverage systems change. So this is, again, new terrain and one we really welcome your feedback on, hopefully during today's discussion and beyond. And of course, the how will you measure these changes ties up again with the new tools. So we're finally at the most interesting part, which is the pilot light. And if you need to take a 3-minute stretch, I'd say now is a good time. So if you want to stand up or just do any shake around or whatever you need to do, grab a glass of water, by all means. We can just pause here for 3 minutes. Give each a chance to do that. I am going to grab some water. So while we're waiting, I wanted to sort of get a sense of the responses you have to the broad questions that we circulated in advance of the webinar. So I hopefully you had a chance to reflect a bit, but if you haven't, I am giving you a bit of heads up to start maybe thinking on those. And they're provided in the following slides. So if you recall, we circulated those about a week ago. And I think I'm hoping most people are back now. So to help kickstart this part of the webinar, which is really the hands-on interactive part, we invited families in transition of Central Toronto Youth Services to comment on the questions that we circulated in the context of their work, of their project work. And regrettably, they couldn't attend today because they had an important training session that couldn't be changed, couldn't be moved. But they agreed to take part via a short pre-recorded video. So I'll invite Eric to please queue up that pre-recorded video, and I'll introduce it by saying that we opened the conversation by asking Leandra and Jordan the question: how do we challenge ourselves to do work at the intersections of multiple overlapping inequities? Which is quite a mouthful. And they rose to the occasion. So we'll just wait for that to come up, and I'll step away and let you have a listen.
Thank you, Andrea. We're excited to be here. Maybe just a word about our project briefly. We work with families, parents / caregivers of transgender and non-binary youth, and the whole goal is simple. We just want to strengthen that relationship to make the family and the home safe for trans youth, because we know what a huge difference it makes. So that's just to ground us in who we are and the work. I think for us, when I looked at this question, I think for me personally, it really is about centering equity at the very start. Like, if that's not kind of the guiding principle, to look at things from an intersectional, anti-oppression and decolonizing way, I think we're already lost. So yeah, we challenge ourselves because it's core to who we're trying to reach in terms of the most vulnerable, but also we're trying to reach those that can make a significant impact on those who are really vulnerable.
Yeah, I think this question is so interesting when applied to our program, because the secret thing about our program is that we actually don't always work with the most marginalized people. We are often working with parents who have super marginalized youth. And so I think that, like, for us, a lot of the time the conversation starts with a critical self-awareness. What is our role in, serving those who are most marginalized? And what is our, what is our role and capacity around making shifts and changes with those who have power, who have privilege, in order to, divest from harmful systems and enact real change. And the cool way that we sort of meet them around that is that, there are people that are dear to them, their kids, who are experiencing a particular kind of violence or discrimination, and often experiencing that in the house. And so there is, I think, some really cool work that we get to do, actually like, I think it is very equity focused, but it's not directly serving those who are most impacted by discrimination. And so I think we are really conscious and aware of like, what is our place as a program that is largely white? And so what is our place in like serving those who are most marginalized? For us so far, it has meant like a really deep focus on relationship building, a really deep focus on relationships generally, and also really equipping the parents that do come to the group around understanding the ways that they, like, gently guiding them around understanding the ways that they are complicit in systems of that, like indiscriminatory systems. I think in the context of children's mental health and even in our program, which does feel more like a community program, but you know, based in a children's mental health context, something that I've noticed in our program is that all of the youth, when I do family intakes, all of the youth come with these labels. They're, you know, ADHD, ADD, on the spectrum, depression, anxiety. And I think that without a sort of critical shift around like where the issue actually is, it can be very easy to really focus our interventions on fixing people, or like even, I think even a more generous approach is like building resiliency with people to like sort of like face up against a system that like is just like always breaking them down. And I think that something that's so like, I think that what the tool really helps is like making the connections between you know, how you know, when we have a social determinants of health lens and we're able to pathologize, quote unquote, a system as like where the issue is, then like we really can start to, in practical terms, look at mental health interventions that are grounded in activism, that are grounded in like an autonomy around being able to impact systemic changes. And I think that at C2AS, we have long known those to be like key components for like positive mental health, is being able to acknowledge and also make changes in a system that is harmful. So I felt like the tool really grounded in that. And in terms of like the growing edge, I have the same sort of thoughts that Leandra does. I think that it can be easy even for us to like look at who comes to our program and be like, oh, we need to serve more Indigenous families. We need to serve more racialized families. We need to serve more Black families. And I think that if you jump to that conclusion without like asking the questions around like, who, like, why, like, who are we? Why does our program look like that? And also, you know, like the questions around that, like who is best serving those communities? What does like, you know, and looking at the systemic piece, like how are resources distributed across services? Like why do we get funding and other services do not? What does that look like on a provincial scale? What does that look like on a national scale? I think those are the pieces that I think, I think those are the pieces that are critical to look at before we jump to the sort of like action piece around like trying to rope in quote unquote more diverse families, which I think comes across as like really inauthentic if we haven't done that work first.
Thank you for that. So lots to unpack in 6 short minutes. And this is an opportunity to hear your reactions to what Leandra and Jordan just said, as well as bring forward your own thoughts around these 2 questions that we put to you before the webinar. So how would you see your project applying the tool to engage with difficult to reach or resistant populations? So this could be in the case of families in transition, working either with parents of gender questioning children and youth, or working with systems like Children's Aid Society and others to remove barriers to marginalization? And then how would you see your project applying the tool to meaningfully assess the equity impacts? So those are, I know, big, broad questions, and we don't have to stick to those questions. We don't have to, you can pose a question of your own. But this is really where we want to open it wide and give you the floor. If I think that's the next slide is à vous la parole. We really are eager to hear. Oh yes, sorry. This is just a backdrop. If you need a little further sort of prompting, thought this spoke very nicely to the interventions we just heard. So who's the brave one who would like to step in and give us their own perspective right now on what we just listened to and anything else related?
I can jump in if are we doing this on audio? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian.
Okay. A lot of the language around this is a bit of a barrier when it comes to, we find when it comes to well, we're working with anyone who doesn't have a graduate degree. And so we've been searching to find ways to better define it in a way that might be more visceral. And the other thing is that, I mean, when you look at this through, like, what we're aiming to do is to not stick our finger up in the air and see which way the wind is blowing and go that way, but instead use our power and privilege that we have to try and support people in the way that they need it now. So like one example that we're looking at is like, 30 years ago, gay and lesbian youth, needed a lot of help, but it was totally unclear which way the wind was blowing. And so for organizations to step into that and provide that support in a way that was visible would have been really complex. And at the same time, like substance use or cannabis use right now, like 10 years ago, people would not have imagined that we would have had a legal access to cannabis, and that we might have youth now who want it to be their job in the future to grow cannabis, right? And so should we be supporting them to do that? And I would say that, it's not entirely clear, it's not safe to even jump into the sexuality and gender stuff, even though that is long past. I mean, you can't say that it's entirely safe to do that. And it's still not entirely safe to do that with cannabis. And there's other issues that will continue to grow. And so I'm looking at what we need to do is tell what we've been working on is a new mission for our organization that's like, has to do with stepping to the edge. So like when passions, purpose, or meaning are frustrated, there may be nowhere to go but toward what may look or feel like the edge. And at Impact, or now we strive to stay at the edge so there's a welcoming community for people when they are there. And we're trying to aim at it in that way so that it doesn't use all these complex words and concepts like intersectionality and also, that the hard to reach or resistant populations is a little thorny language, I think, for some people. There's a lot to unpack in that. So we're just trying to simplify it.
Well, thanks, Brian, for stepping up first and for your candid remarks. Would you mind just identifying your organization, or is it changed? Is the name changing?
We're Matsqui Abbotsford Impact Society out in Abbotsford, BC, and our project is called Nation of Wellness, or NOW.
Thank you. And so tell me something. When you say you're striving to stay at the edge or stepping to the edge, is that a different word for intersectionality? Is that a more visceral and just real term for you?
Well, I think it's acknowledging that people who are at that intersectional place don't have a lot of space to move, right? And if someone, it feels perilous, and if you don't have community there, you may end up having to take a lot of risks that are necessary, but are still unsafe and are going to have a lot of effects if you do them alone. So I think that's where we need to, create that community for folks. So in a way, yes, but we're trying to avoid necessarily defining that for people, and instead are using language that people have identified to us as it describes their sense of their situation.
And this is the conundrum, right? Because at the same time, we want to be able to find a way to use language that's inclusive, and to recognize different social locations, different realities, different intersectional realities. And so, staying at the edge or being at the edge is definitely, I think, well, is something that resonates, I think, with most people, but it's also something that isn't maybe as intuitive in terms of how we speak about it, how we have to start thinking about unpacking that term. What does it mean, right? And I know that that's not something you can perhaps answer on the spot, but.
Well, we work a whole lot with folks who have defined themselves as being part of the street community.
Right.
And there's definitely, there's Indigenous, LGBTQ, 2S youth who have, people who have experienced the child welfare system, all that kind of stuff is well represented and disproportionately represented there. And the challenge that we're taking on is kind of bringing the street community together with young people, which is but I agree, it doesn't define marginalization, and a lot of folks we work with don't like the term marginalized. They prefer a term like restricted.
Yeah.
And certainly the edge, being restricted to the edge, seems to fit with their sense of what's going on.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Does anybody else want to comment on what Brian said or what was heard in the video or anything else? I think there's some good ideas coming forward.
It looks like Matt has his hand up.
Okay, thank you. I can't see that for some reason.
Bonjour, hello. My name is Matt. I work with the Students' Commission of Canada. And one tension that has been pulling like a tug of war in my head since you started talking, and is it Andrea or Andrea? I want to make sure I get it right.
Andrea is fine.
Andrea, okay, great, thank you. Is this like tension between we need lots of voices and lots of force. Oh, there's my face, hello. Lots of like there's lots of momentum that we need to, you know, like the water has to get so high before the boulders begin to move and we begin to create that system level change. And that requires a lot of coordination across lots of different populations. But in order to get into the very heart of the intersectionality of inequality, it requires such patience and usually untimed and deep relationship with especially a young person working with young people, to find out like what that is and like what is the real what is that like really murky gray zone that was like on that diagram of the intersectionalities of what's pushing you off the edge or what's keeping you from maybe not being here tomorrow, or what's keeping you from accessing health services. And that takes so much time and energy and resources. So there's this tension that is struck in this this balance of if you actually want to make change in community, if you actually want to make change in an organization, if you actually want to make something land in Ottawa with a big, like, you know, with some force behind it, and tending to that, you know, like 11 p.m. text conversation with a youth that really is like reaching out to you and like needs help. And I think there's a need to bottle that story and capture that story and understanding, and somehow be able to amplify it to the point where system level change can happen. I think as far as measurement goes, there's this tension and balance that's struck with the qualitative and the quantitative in our ability to tell story, and how we do that. And maybe part of that opens the door and part of that tells the soul. But yeah, that tension, looking at the Students Commission's work over the last several years, but especially through the pandemic, there is such a deep dive in relationship, and it's hard to capture that and amplify that to change system level issues.
Thank you for that, Matt. And would somebody like to respond to Matt's reflection on that tension between capturing, or not capturing, but having the time to do that deep relationship building, and also getting to the place of being able to influence systems.
I would say it is really challenging in terms of, like, as an example, we have youth who we are helping learn, you know, how to grow marijuana, and it's because that's the only thing they're interested in, and we want to help them feel like they belong. It's very complex to go to the school district and say, you know, recommend that some of your youth join in with our groups. So we're trying to figure out a way to put it to connect that to what they're saying about an equity lens that they want to have, and to favor youth voice, and to have youth determine their own relevant learning journeys, and trying to help them see how we're in line with that. But also, we don't want to surprise them, right? We don't want them to think they're sending youth to a program that does not at all resemble what we're doing. And I don't know how they're going to respond. I don't know if they will jump at it, but it's at least it's a dialogue point, and it's kind of calling them on the language that they're using and helping them to unpack it.
So you're talking about an empowerment model, but one that is
well, one where we're recognizing the power and privilege that we have, and also highlighting that to the organizations, to the partners that we work with, about the power and privilege that they have, and kind of setting up an opportunity for them to explore how they might use that to reach their stated goals. And what's going to be complex about it. I think one of the big things that we're trying to focus on is being clear with each other what's challenging about the changes that we're trying to make, and then exploring how relationship building is going to help us to be resilient as we face all these challenges. So we're trying to be transparent about that. And so that we're not just focusing on what change we want to make, we're also focusing on the conditions that allow change to happen, especially challenging change like this. So, which, in our view is, caring connected relationships and opportunities to participate and contribute within those caring connected relationships, which leads everyone to have a higher expectations of what we can accomplish.
That's very nicely put. Hope you'll share that with us when you're.
It's in our application, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, like, as you redefine the mission and all that, I'm sure it will make its way into your public facing documents. So I hope you.
We're working on a 1-page right now. It's running laps in my head. I have to get it onto paper, otherwise I will never sleep. So.
Yeah, good idea. Oh, I'm sure someone else has something to contribute to this conversation. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. In terms of some of the things that were said, and this is around, this sort of links with what Jordan was saying around the growing edge. So they were suggesting that there's room for growth in these tools. That exploratory piece around these tensions, and also around the critical thinking that we do around the work, challenging ourselves around who we serve, who we enter into relationship with, where we focus our attention in order to serve, to their language, the most marginalized. So in their case, not necessarily having direct relationship with the most marginalized, but having direct relationship with people who can change the trajectory of their lives, parents and others who intervene. Some of the players you were speaking about, Brian, right? So these are tough and not always obvious choices that projects probably have to make because of limited resources, capacity, and so forth. Where you put your focus, knowing what you want to accomplish and what the benefits that you're seeking are for that population, but not necessarily always having that direct relationship or direct contact and caregiver, caretaker kind of role. So it's different for everyone. It's different for every project. Maybe sharing some good practices with one another might help to leverage each other's work, because there are some commonalities for sure. Somebody want to speak? Okay, well, we may want to just close shortly here. I didn't realize that we're already less than 15 minutes from the end of the session. This has gone by very quickly. And I guess what I wanted to have an opportunity to do is just share a few examples of different measurement methods that might help support your own attempts to build up your own evidence base, your own knowledge base, and recognizing that looks different for different projects. So I know, can someone tell me exactly how much time we have left?
Just about 8 minutes to the end, the 2:30 Eastern time, at least to the bottom of that hour.
So what I'm going to suggest, because you can look at this yourselves, is we'll just go very quickly, one slide at a time, if you don't mind, Eric. You can explore these later on. If we could advance to, yes, so probably all familiar with this framework, and this is really an opportunity to look at some common, potentially common indicators in the future. So we'll skip to the next, please. Again, this is a framework we have, I think, introduced to it before. But what we maybe haven't talked about is the next slide, please. Is sorry, if you'll skip to the next slide. Yeah, so this tool that they have developed as part of the framework, the wellness framework, has, I think it's something like 66 measures, and there are potentially here, there's a potential for adaptation. So I would be interested to know whether that's of interest to folks to explore more deeply. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is again just an example of the cultural connections that again could be adapted to your particular particular populations you work with. Next slide, please. And this again is another framework that's been applied by some of the projects that we are working with now. So I invite you, if you're not familiar with YouthRex, I invite you to visit their website and have a look. And here again is trying to demystify intersectionality. So really taking it to a level that was hopefully a little bit more grounded in frontline work. The opportunity agenda created. Next slide, please. So please go over to the next slide. Yes, so just before we wrap up, we just wanted to have an opportunity to get a sense from you whether a follow-up session might be of use particularly focusing on measures and methods. So going into a deeper dive in some of the tools that we just took, we really did do at a glance. Didn't mean it for it to be that literal, but it was. So if you wouldn't mind responding to the poll. Over to you, Annetta.
Thanks, Andrea. So the poll is, it should be up on your screens now. Would a follow-up session to further explore equity measures and methods be useful? Une séance de suivi pour explorer davantage les mesures et les méthodes d'équité serait-elle utile? So it's a simple yes or no. Making it easy for the end of the webinar with so much rich information. So just a few more moments here. All right, I think everybody's voted, so I'll close that poll now. And so everybody said yes, another like session follow-up would be useful. And thanks very much, everybody, for your votes.
Thank you, Annetta. And so I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Alice.
Can I add something really quickly about using those tools in the future? It would be nice if we could have some dialogue among the organizations about what exploring what we might use and how we might work together on using them or adapting them.
Great, that's a good segue then for for Colleen.
You're just on mute, Colleen.
Okay, you think after 2 years I would know to unmute myself, but here I am. You can hear me now, I guess. I was just going to say it's always a challenge to wrap up a webinar that's just so rich, and but I'm going to do my best here. I want to take a few minutes just to thank Andrea for bringing us some different ways of how to look at health equity. And I think, what you did well today is take such a complex concept and break it down into smaller approaches and measurements and processes so that we can understand it, and for the projects to take it back to their teams and look at it. But I also want to thank Brian and Matt for reminding us of just how complex the term health equity really is, and bringing their experience and their knowledge from the field into the discussion. And I think between those two, there's a really nice relationship that we can all, work together from Andrea's expertise and also this lived experience that Brian and Matt highlighted, in the sense that, there is so much to learn and so much to process and so much to understand, that it's great to hear that people are interested in doing another follow-up that we will arrange, in the near future. And speaking about the near future, I just quickly want to say, expect to save a date from the Hub that we are designing some webinars and resources around the stages of change and the logic model that we saw in your reports, that there's some interest there. So we will develop those over the summer and send you out a save the date that we will implement in the fall. I think in the summer, we all need a break and do some self-care and some vacation. So thanks to everyone. Thank you again, Andrea. We certainly appreciate your expertise in joining us today. So from the Hub, enjoy the rest of your morning or afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.